Okay, so I mean, of all the topics that Pete mentioned, religion wasn't really one of them. But this is a relatively new departure from me. But over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a few studies that I've done with my many collaborators, and therefore I'm going to talk today about taking an evolutionary ecology approach to religious beliefs and practices. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 studies, one of which is published, one of which is just about to be published. I actually thought it would have been published by now, but it's coming out shortly, and one of which is kind of work in progress, which is why I put the little "don't tweet" sign up on the start. And what they have in common, apart from being about, understanding religion, I'm really trying to ask whether human behavioural ecology type approaches can help us understand variation in religious beliefs and practices. So religions are interesting for evolutionary biologists because for lots of reasons, but one of which is they often include many costly obligations, for example, spending time in prayer. So I've just got some pictures here. These young men are praying. These are Tibetan Buddhists, and throwing prayer papers up to the Buddhas who are riding on horseback in the skies. So they walk up to a high point. There's pilgrimages, which can involve spending time just walking around your local temple or stupa, or they can involve going on long journeys, sometimes taking weeks or even months. And the real sort of high cost version, every third step you have to prostrate yourself on the ground. So the costs involved are almost unimaginable, like these guys here. Some villages still have various harmful, if you like, hurtful displays. I won't keep that one on very long in case someone doesn't like the sight of blood. But also, perhaps more importantly, everyone gives a large proportion of their wealth to these religious institutions. And these are not particularly wealthy people, and they are giving huge amounts of money to these religious institutions. So these Buddhist monasteries generally don't grow their own food. They generally survive almost entirely off donations from the community. So one of the kind of themes in both the religious studies literature and also in the kind of cultural evolution of religion literature is that, one of the things that might be motivating you to pay these high costs is something to do with afterlife beliefs. So here, this is a sort of Tibetan reincarnation wheel, and as I say, I'm not an expert on the anthropology of religions, but as you'll see from this picture, there are, Buddhists believe that you're reincarnated, so when you die, you'll go into another life, and your actions in which life you go into depend upon your actions in your previous life. So, for example, I believe Tibetan Buddhism has at least 3, if not 5, different forms of hell. You can see on the right here. Let me put my laser pointer on here. Over on the right here, you've got hell involving various forms of fire, or they've got other hells that involve various forms of water, and there's another hell down here. I'm not even quite sure what's going on, but you're in all sorts of trouble if you're there, so you don't want to be there. Or you might be reborn in this world as an animal, or as another human. If you achieve a good karma, you may become a Buddha. And actually the only way to really escape this circle of reincarnation is if you achieve enlightenment, and then you can get out and achieve, peace from this eternal struggle. Now, obviously, that's not, those are examples from where I've been working, but obviously that idea, some sort of idea about afterlife beliefs is commonly held elsewhere. This is actually obviously in Christianity and other Abrahamic religions. It's also a feature. I took this photo in cathedral just up. This is in Albi in southwest France, and I was actually struck by the similarity of this image with the previous one that I just showed you. So obviously in Christian belief, there's no reincarnation. If you're down there, you're down there. But I imagine it would concentrate the mind if you sit and watch this every Sunday or every other day. And obviously Islamic beliefs also include concepts of afterlife belief based on judgment as well. They just don't use images to teach people about that. So even though these three papers I'm going to talk about address slightly different questions, I guess one of the themes that may come through is, how do beliefs and ecology shape behavior? And it might be, so, quite a simple model might be that we don't really have to think about ecology too much, like, you acquire a religious belief and that determines your behavior, and some simple cultural evolution models might take that form, or at least think that was the most important sort of direction. Or perhaps, a more behavioral ecology approach might think that actually it's ecology that's shaping behavior, and that religious norms are just somehow emergent from that. So to give an example, I might say, well, those people over there are monogamous because they're Christians, whereas those people over there are allowed to marry polygynously because they're Muslims. Or you might say, actually, well, the reason Christian norms require monogamy is because Christianity arose in somewhere where people were already monogamous, and Islam arose in places where people were already allowed to be polygynous, and therefore the religious norms were just kind of the norms that were coming out of the way people were living anyway. And then maybe, there's some feedback in that. Perhaps religious beliefs can sort of reinforce those norms and make them rather hard to change. Anyway, these are the sort of deeper questions that we might solve by trying to look at these relationships. So I'm going to talk, first of all, so 3 studies, as I said, and the first one is asking the question, are donations, so these are charitable and religious donations, motivated by fear of divine punishment or more by human reputational concerns? So this is actually published already in Royal Society Open Science, and here are my co-authors, Joanna Howe and Jaja. And we used a lab in-field economic gain to look at donations in both a public and a private context in different sites all over the area near Lanzhou University, where we were based at the time. And lab in field basically means you're bringing, so the techniques obviously came from evolutionary economics, but sort of putting them in ecological context. So in this particular, this game was a little bit complicated because of several things we're doing. I'm just going to tell you about one here, but we gave individuals a choice of, they had to choose 2 out of 4 institutions to donate to. 2 were charities, one was the nearest mosque, one was the nearest monastery, and most people either chose the mosque and a charity if they were Muslim, a monastery and charity if they were Buddhist, or 2 charities if they were atheist. I think 1 person out of 500 chose the mosque and the monastery. But we also did, so they were given 10 yuan and asked to donate some of it to each of these 2 charities, and could keep what they didn't donate for themselves. And we had a public and a private version, but anyway, the kind of ecological bit was really community size. So, so some of the communities, the interesting thing about this part of China is that it's very mixed. It's got lots of different religions, and there were Buddhists, there were Muslims, and there were atheists, and there were small villages, and there were sites in large cities. So if you just look at this map of China, that's yellow square there. Here, this is Gansu province, which you've probably never heard of. It's right on the edge. So this is the Tibetan plateau here, and this is a Tibetan autonomous region, but actually the Tibetan plateau extends right beyond there. So this is the edge of it here. And this is really the area where we were working in. But anyway, one of the reasons we were interested in community size was because we were interested in testing the idea that it has an effect on reputational concerns. Because if you're living in a small community, everyone knows you. If you're living in a city, maybe they don't. So reputational concerns would be less. And also we found that those living in small villages had mostly been living there for over 20 years. They've been living there basically their whole life, whereas in the cities, sites in the cities, very high turnover, 45% have been living there 1 to 3 years. So much less likely that people will know you. So if reputation matters, we should expect bigger donations in the villages, small. And that's exactly actually what we found. Community size, those living in cities gave less than those living in villages, even after you control for education and poverty. But actually what was quite interesting was, and that was in the public version of the game, and in the private version of the game, that didn't matter, which also strengthened our notion that reputation was important. But it was actually interesting that we had a long questionnaire, and belief in divine punishment, reward, etc., wasn't particularly relevant. Neither was whether they'd chosen a religious or non-religious institution, actually. Although religious practice was a significant positive predictor, but these were the public. So we did a principal component analysis. So belief, afterlife beliefs and punishment and reward didn't have an effect, but the more kind of public aspects of religious practice, like how often you went to the mosque or how often you went to the temple, were more significant. So on the face of it, it seems that the larger donations were actually more strongly associated with things like the nature of the community that you lived in and how active you were in your religious practice, rather than the beliefs themselves. So the sort of private beliefs in this case weren't important. And I know that these games are, economic games are very context specific, but I would say that what I do like about this study was that it was a very diverse sample, 500 people across, I think it was 17 sites. And they're not all different sites all over the world with a different team doing everything. It's the same team doing the study and all living in the same country, which is China. So I think that's quite a strong result. But it doesn't really tell you about the direction of causation necessarily. And in order to do that, it would be nice to do these macroevolutionary or phylogenetic studies. And so the second paper I'm going to talk about is actually trying to do exactly that. And we're interested in the coevolution of eschatological beliefs and revolution and warfare. And if you've never heard the word eschatological, it's things to do with the fate of your soul after death. So there's a long-standing kind of discussion in the religious studies literature of how apocalyptic beliefs tend to be associated with revolution. So that's sort of in-group violence to overthrow your leaders. And there's possibly a flip side. There are actually some Islamic and other groups that are, and Buddhist groups that are obviously believe in reincarnation. And some people think that's associated with a lack of warfare and violence. So I actually don't know anything much about Islamic history at all, but this project was actually the idea of my former master's student, Kiran Basava there, who actually came to us at UCL from a background in religious studies, which is not as unusual as you might think, but fairly unusual in terms of our intake for master students. And she very much wanted to do this project and had a good knowledge of. So she managed to work through Islamic history to create this amazing phylogeny. Now, so this is a study of basically, she managed to identify 77 historic Islamic sects, and with the help of various secondary and primary texts, put them in the form of a phylogeny. Now, those of you that have followed any of my other phylogenetic work will know that phylogenies are incredibly useful for studying evolution and cultural evolution. Normally, we infer phylogenies from languages, and we look at the diversity in languages in the present to infer the past. And that's borrowing techniques from evolutionary biology, who've looked at diversity in the present to infer the past evolutionary trajectories in biological species. So this is a bit of a departure from me, because I've never really built a phylogeny from the ground up. But the unusual thing about this particular case, we're using religious schools and sects as our unit. And because Islam is relatively recent, from the 7th century, this is all in history. So this is all built up with kind of historical information. And one of the interesting things about that is it enables you to see groups that are now extinct in a way that it's quite hard to get a handle on that when you're inferring phylogenies from data in the present. And so actually the other co-author on this paper, Mei Zhang, is very interested in cultural extinction, and this having a sort of phylogeny in this way enables us to look at extinction as well as some of the other things that phylogenies allow us to do. Now, obviously, history is complicated. So some people have said to us, well, why on earth are you reducing Islamic history to this like tree? Why be so simplistic? And, you know, some people ask that politely and some people asked it less politely. But I mean, the answer is that we want to make you, well, first of all, I think it is a good model, because these are, you know, we know when the belief originated. It's historic, you know, the schisms and the splits in the various schools have been documented historically. So it does seem like quite a good model. And then there's another sort of methodological reason, which it enables us to bring in all these evolutionary models that have been developed in evolutionary biology, basically, to try and use their methods to try and understand the processes of cultural evolution. So on this tree here, you can see that, so this is the tree, but we've also mapped, I should say, by the way, just from the previous slide, I think there are about 50 or 55 Islamic sects that are still current, but at least another 20 or so that have either gone extinct, either because they just ceased to exist or because they split into two other groups. So those are marked in orange. So in phylogenetic methods, not only do you need the tree, but you need to map characters onto the tree. And we can do that by looking at the way characters are in the present. But again, we've got historical information. So for many of these nodes, we also had historical data. And when we didn't have historical data, we used phylogenetic methods to infer ancestral states. So we actually wanted to use, so we use the model discrete in base traits developed by Mark Pagel on looking at the co-evolution of traits. So you've probably, a lot of people are using, you know, phylogenetically controlled regressions, but I always thought the most interesting use of phylogenetic methods is actually to compare these specific models of co-evolution. That's where I really think it comes into its own. And in this particular model, you basically compare two models, one where two traits are evolving independently and one where they're co-evolving. So if they're evolving independently, then let's say you've got trait X and it's on the branches of the phylogeny, that trait's being lost and gained, and these arrows show the rate of loss and gain. And trait Y is also being lost and gained along branches of your tree, but the two are not influencing each other's loss or gain in any way. That's the independent model. Or the dependent model, they are influencing. So in other words, the likelihood that trait X will be gained or lost depends on whether trait Y is present or absent. And that model obviously has 8 different possible transition rates. And you use Bayesian, use ARC or Bayes factors to compare your various models and see which one fits best. And actually in this particular case, as I said before, we're looking at whether there's a relationship between apocalyptic beliefs and revolution, as has been described in the religious studies literature. And in fact, the dependent model was the best model, which means these 2 traits do appear to be co-evolving. And so you try and fit this kind of model here. This is actually for in-group revolution. This is for out-group violence, which actually was also significant, but less so. But they're very similar best model. So the best model in this case, actually all kinds of transitions do occur on that tree, except for one. So you can take out, so if you're wondering, how does a culture that has no apocalyptic beliefs and no revolution going on become a culture that does have apocalyptic beliefs and does have revolution going on? And the answer is it doesn't travel this way, as in a peaceful group doesn't suddenly acquire apocalyptic beliefs and then become revolutionary. It actually goes the other way. It has to, because this arrow doesn't happen. So first you gain revolution and then apocalyptic beliefs follow. So yes, indeed, there is an association between the 2 traits, but it seems to be that revolution or warfare is predisposing groups to take up apocalyptic beliefs, not the other way around. By the way, I should say apocalyptic beliefs we defined as, well, it's a belief that the end of times is imminent. So lots of religions believe in some kind of judgment at the end of times, but it's like far away. But what we're calling these apocalyptic beliefs are that it's imminent. And, people had hypothesized that this was spurring people to revolution, but actually it seems to be the other way around. So I should also mention that because we have like a tree in real time, as it were, we could look at group extinction. And this is kind of interesting, and I almost don't really know how to explain it. So we actually compared 2 different beliefs here, apocalyptic beliefs in this panel B and reincarnation beliefs. Incidentally, some Islamic groups, even though you probably associate reincarnation with Buddhist groups, some Islamic groups, a small minority of them, but some of them do actually have reincarnation beliefs. And but reincarnation, we looked at whether beliefs were associated with the survival of a particular sect or school. So these are just survival curves. And in fact, the answer was not much when you're talking, not at all when you're talking about reincarnation beliefs. But when we look at apocalyptic beliefs, which is panel B, it was extraordinary. I mean, apocalyptic beliefs are associated with a much shorter life expectancy of that particular sect. So I don't really know what to make of that, except to say we've already shown that apocalyptic beliefs are associated with revolution and warfare, and indeed revolutionary violence and religiously motivated outgroup violence were also associated with cultural extinction of these groups. So make of it what you will, but apocalyptic beliefs seem to be associated with violence and with group extinction at a faster rate than sects that didn't have those beliefs. Okay, so the third study, slightly different, but again, going back to these costly behaviors, and again, thinking a little bit about the evolutionary institutions. So perhaps of all the costly behaviors, some of them, one of the most costly might appear to be giving your child up to a religious institution and where they actually live a celibate life. And this would seem to be incredibly costly, but So we were interested in this question. So are monasteries forcing individuals, if you like, because they're strong institutions, to donate offspring to the monastery, even though it is actually harming their inclusive fitness, because they do become celibate if you become a monk? And again, this is something that's common in Tibetan Buddhism, but it was common historically, obviously, in Christianity and other forms of Buddhism. So this is quite common in practice around the world. Or is it something that actually could have evolved through some kind of inclusive fitness benefit? And so this paper is actually not ready really yet. We haven't actually written it fully, but we're working on it right now. But we were partly inspired by Peter's challenge last week to talk about it anyway. And so those of us that did the other study were involved in this study too, including some others, especially Dujuan and Li Chong, and Alberto Micheletti, who's done the inclusive fitness models of being a monk that we're trying to test and use here. So monasteries are super important institutions up on the Tibetan plateau, because they were seats of learning and also power in many ways. So they provide religious services, but they were also a little bit like universities. They had like philosophy schools, medical schools. They trained children to read and write. They were a bank, you could borrow money. They were a court because you could go and get disputes resolved. So this is really a seat of learning and a seat of power. And this picture is actually monks debating, which is a sort of, I couldn't quite work out how much of it was ritualized and how much of it was really what we would call debating. I always felt, so the monks are in pairs here, and one's always sitting down, one's always standing up. I always felt the one sitting down must be at a bit of a disadvantage. But anyway, this is from the Sira Monastery in, this picture was taken at the Sira Monastery in Lhasa, which is right over on the kind of western end of the Tibetan plateau. But our study site was a full day's ride on the train away from there, right over on, sorry, they were on the, we were over on the eastern side of the Tibetan plateau, which is a bit more relaxed in some ways. But still, monasteries were incredibly important institutions. In this area, most people are nomadic. So people live in tents most of the year. They're herding yaks and sheep, mostly, some cattle. So historically, the only real settlements would have been, the main settlements would have been around monasteries. So here's a monastery with, and over here you see where the monks were residing. And then you get small towns springing up around monasteries where older people might live because nomadic life is getting hard and they want to be near the monastery. And also lots of people go on pilgrimage to the monastery. So there's like restaurants and shops and that sort of thing. And nowadays, much more settlement is growing around these settlements. This particular one, when we visited, there was no one in the monastery at all. The whole building was completely empty. And everyone said, oh, that's because they're all on some holiday. They're all camping over there. So we went down, and sure enough, they were all camping for 2 weeks. This was their summer holiday. And actually, you can see this. So here are some of the young monks playing ping pong. They were really useless at ping pong because they only get this holiday time really to play it, I think. But you can see they're not allowed to wear shirts or trousers. And it's cold on the Tibetan plateau, even in summer, which this was. These are the older monks having a picnic over here. And this chap who's wearing the warmer clothes is one of the brothers of one of the monks, just coming to visit his brother. But it was nice to see them playing, but a lot of the time there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of studying, there's a lot of hard physical work just to run the monastery. Even in the winter, there's like exercise classes and all this kind of thing that they do. There's an awful lot of time spent praying. They don't really like you taking photos of people at prayer, but they take off their boots. So here, when you see all these boots outside the prayer halls, you know that everyone's praying. And they do exams, they have to study. And actually we're all looking at this thing on the wall here, over in this picture down on the right. We got very interested in it because they printed the names of the monks, their exam results in one column. And then in a column directly next to the exam results were how much each of their parents had donated to the monastery. So I put that in to remind you that actually it's not necessarily free to donate your child to the monastery. You're expected to donate to the monastery anyway, but if you have a child there, you definitely seems to be expected to donate. But having said that, the monks retain links with their family. So most families will have a family monk, and you will call on them when you need religious services at births and deaths and weddings and any other kind of reason why you might need prayer. And here, actually, this little chap has visiting his family because his sister just had a baby, so he's come to see his nephew. But anyway, I digress. So being a monk is hard. I mean, you're separated from your family life at the age of about 7 or 10. Anyway, you live a life of celibacy and hardship and prayer, but you do not reproduce. So to an evolutionary biologist, that's instantly a challenge. But Alberto has been modeling how could this trait evolve by inclusive fitness, or, you know, obviously it's kind of a, you know, you're giving up your reproductive success. So in this part of the world, it's mainly males who become monks. So this is a model of men becoming monks. So just to work out a general model, how would you, celibacy obviously means that you pay a big cost, which is that you don't reproduce. But we now understand that, you know, where you have a cost, there's always a benefit. In other words, you're giving up your reproduction, so others in the community will gain from that because you're opening up reproductive slots. This time here is to do with dispersal. So some of those others in your community are your kin, but some of them have dispersed, and then unrelated individuals will have dispersed in to replace them. So your relatedness to the group partly depends on this term of dispersal, but there will be a benefit to those related to you in the group who are reproducing more because you have given up your reproductive opportunities in that village or whatever. But this term's always going to be less than 1, and this term is always going to be less than 1. So in fact, it's impossible for this term to, well, in other words, for this term to be bigger than that term. So basically celibacy, if you just take a simple model like that, celibacy can't evolve unless you're going to start talking about group selection or something. I mean, it's not going to happen. We also looked at the case where, what if, because obviously children go to the monastery quite young, what if your parents are deciding rather than you? And it's the same costs and benefits, except here in this case, it's how you're related to your offspring, how the parents are related to their offspring moderates that cost, and how they're related to other males in the group, they're going to benefit from this. But again, that term can't be larger than that term, so we wouldn't expect it to evolve. It's not enough to outweigh the cost. However, if you assume that your brothers in your family get a big chunk of that benefit, then I think the costs and benefits can change somewhat. So we've added an extra term to the model here, which is the benefit gained by your brother. So when you give up reproducing, if there's a special benefit to your brothers, and then the other benefit to the rest of the group is just what's left that your brothers don't take, as it were. In this case, by the way, I should say these are all a function of X star. So in other words, the costs of giving up reproduction somewhat depend on how many other people are doing it. If lots of people are doing it, then the reproductive prospects of those not doing it are obviously very good. Whereas if very few people are giving up reproduction, then there's lots of people to compete with. So this is where the frequency dependence comes in. But anyway, in this case, celibacy can evolve depending on how big this benefit actually is. And in fact, if you assume parental control, again, it can evolve because the parent is, of course, related to the offspring that's paying the cost, but they are also related to all the other offspring that are gaining this benefit. So, and if you plot those graphically, if you assume that the individual is in control, in other words, the child is sort of, if you like, deciding for himself, and this is a function of the non-celibate benefits to non-celibate brothers, if those are high, there might be some individuals who choose to be celibate monks. But if you assume that it's actually parental control, then that relationship seems quite much more likely to evolve. So this is assuming that parents, value all their children equally, and therefore only, one child is paying the cost, the others are not. And other benefits are going to the brothers who are not celibate. So just to give you an idea of the scale of this thing, there was some sort of expectation through quite a lot of what I've read of about 1 boy in 7 going to the monastery. And there's even some accounts of times in history where maybe it was even as high as 1 in 3, but that seems very unusual. But it doesn't seem at all impossible that, quite a high level of male celibacy can evolve through this mechanism. So how can we test that? Well, we were collecting demographic data in these villages, in these communities, so we weren't getting data in monasteries, but we were getting data in the community, and they were saying where all their children, what professions they were all in, including how many of them were monks. So we were able to look at the inclusive fitness of monks just in our demographic data. And if you remember, in Alberto's model, the benefit to your brothers was one of the key terms. And this is just looking at the reproductive success of men who have a monk who is a brother versus those who have a brother who is not a monk. And actually, this is broken down by if you just have one brother or if you have like 2 or more brothers. But in both cases, the having a brother who is a monk was good for your reproductive success. So if you're out and about, it's great if one of your brothers is living in the monastery. Haven't really talked much about women, but we did the same analysis looking at sisters of monks, and this is actually looking at age at first birth. I should say this is not, don't quote us on this because we haven't used all our data yet, but it does look like, so to be a sister of a monk is actually not a great benefit. There's no real improvement here in age at first birth, but to be the sister-in-law of a monk, in other words, if you're married to, if your husband has a brother who's a monk, that's also good news. So that's showing the same effect of the brothers, actually. I was just showing it through the wives of the brothers. So this does suggest it's not necessarily just through making them more polygynous. There's actually a concrete benefit to having a monk brother. And then looking at the question of grandfathers. So these are the guys who will have sent one of their children or not to go and be a monk. And And again, this is just breaking, this is not fully analysed, it's raw data, but based on, we did it again, breaking it down by family size, because we thought it'd be very costly in a small family if you gave one of your very few children over to the monastery, but it turned out it was never costly, actually. And in large family sizes, it was possibly beneficial. So going back to what we're talking about here in terms of sort of ecological models, it seems that at least in the context of the harsh climate of Tibet, it's actually not really a fitness cost in terms of, and that there could be inclusive fitness benefits in terms of quite a reasonably high proportion of men living in these different institutions that are monasteries. So taking up Peter's challenge from last week, I disagree that, I think it was a great talk, but one of the slides at the end said something along the lines of kin selection doesn't really work, or can't be used to generate institutions or whatever. So I think, Sergey, you're going to have to put one of those little like disclaimer things like they do on President Trump's tweets. Like, some people disagree with this view, and I'm one of them. So hopefully I've convinced you that kin selection can apply in helping us understand both institutions and, quite high institutional structures in society. And this is just putting results from all three of those papers back together again. So both at macro and micro level, I'm not sure that beliefs are driving behavior, at least not on their own. We've got more evidence of macro level warfare driving beliefs, so the relationship going in the opposite direction, and possibly how you live having more of an effect on both monetary donations and also possibly even donations, as it were, of children. So going back to these models, I think I'd probably like to leave all arrows in all directions just to be on the safe side, but I still prefer, I think, this idea that ecology is driving behavior and that religious beliefs are somehow emergent from that. In other words, model B, if this blue arrow is one of the more important relationships. I think in the original slide, I kind of assumed that religious beliefs can't really be having an effect on ecology, but then of course we realize they massively are, because obviously if you've got a huge proportion of the male population, it's almost like 1 in 7 villages is like a monastery where everyone's male and celibate, and therefore it's having a big effect on the sex ratio. So that's the paper we're working on at the moment as well, along with this modelling paper. So I do think you can't really leave this out at all, and I still, even something like religious belief, which has, until quite recently really been more the focus of social anthropologists and other forms of study other than behavioural ecology, I think it's now something that is, something that does benefit from a more HBE lens, which is what I tried to do here. So there they all are. The guys who are not going to reproduce are going to devote their life to religion mostly. And it just remains for me to thank all my co-authors here, just listed alphabetically, all of whom actually were completely essential to various different bits of the study, and at least 2 of them live in or have strong connections with our study sites, which was really the only reason we were able to get permission and agreement to work there. So yeah, very much thank you to Kieran Yuan, Joanne, Ahau, Berto, Jaja, May, and Lee Chung, and also the support of UCL and Lanzhou and the ERC who are funding us at the moment. And of course, all the other helpers, mostly from the communities who helped us collect data in the field, and those long-suffering individuals who filled in all our many demographic questionnaires that we asked them to fill. So thank you all. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Yeah, thanks a lot. Very interesting talk. You know, you might want to stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, let me try and get rid of that.
Just in case, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we have a number of questions, and the first one is about the first part of your talk, and it's about motives for religious donations. So you were talking mostly about divine punishment or reputation, but what about other motives, such as a belief that a religious institution is serving a public good?
I don't think we asked that exact question. I'll have to refer people to the paper, but I don't think we asked that exact. I think we were, yeah, we did. We asked specifically about divine punishment, but I don't think we asked that exact one. So it was a principle. I mean, I'll try and get, I don't know if Aha's tuned in, but he did this principle component analysis, and it was really the afterlife beliefs did fall out as being different from the practices, and that's why. And then we had a third principal component that was just kind of a whole mix of other not very definable things. So I can't answer that question very well, but I think actually another thing that came out in that practices thing was how close you were living to the institution. That was quite interesting. So there does seem to be, I mean, that was actually something people bring up in conversation. It's almost like kind of Wi-Fi. Like if you're really close to one of these religious institutions, you have to behave yourself. Whereas if you're miles away, maybe it doesn't matter quite so much, you know. But whether it's public good, yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I should have asked that, and I don't think we did. But I will consult. But I don't think that was. We had a long list of questions, and I don't think that was one of them, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And there is a question about the second part of your talk. Could apocalyptic beliefs be associated with group extinction because the apocalypse never happens and the belief is abandoned?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That is a good idea. Well, although once the, I'm not sure that, so you could, in other words, you change your belief because after some time, nothing happens.
Yeah. There is a continuation of this question that sometimes actually people double down in their beliefs. So it's.
I wonder if it's fine scale enough to do that. I mean, May did the phylogenetics. Maybe she can type what she thinks in the chat. But but I think I guess that's possible in that but I think what's more likely is if things become peaceful, the beliefs change, and if things become violent, the beliefs come up, because I'm not really sure why you would have a sense of history over the kind of timescales we're talking about. Like even the I mean, it took about 500 years for most of the apocalyptic belief groups to go extinct in this data set. So it's still not really talking about individual beliefs. We're talking, that's a group level analysis about, how long does that group level trait influence the survival of the group. So it's a little bit hard to interpret it in terms of individuals changing their mind.
Thank you. And then there is a bunch of questions about monks and monasteries. Okay. Did you look at economic factors of households? For example, are wealthy households more likely to be able to afford large families? And they can afford to send one son to the monk and support the monastery. So could a monastic decision be driven by competition for prestige among wealthy families?
Well, okay, so it's work in progress, but we do have data that will hopefully enable us to answer that question, even if I can't answer it now. But if you look at the age at first birth analysis, we did control for wealth in that. And but that was looking at, yeah, I didn't see that was as measured by number of yaks. I mean, it's, you know, it's quite hard to measure wealth, but we do have measures of wealth, and that you know, that's quite a good one, because basically they're pastoralists, so you know, number of yaks is a pretty good indication. And I mean, wealth. I mean, actually, children are going to monasteries from both wealthy and poor families, because even though it is associated with large donations from some families, so they actually have this system whereby, you know, like every few years, your village has, it's almost as they say, like 1 village in 7 is a monastery, and like every 7 years they'll come round to your village, and there's a day when each family has to make massive donations in return for prayer all day for their good fortune, you know. And it's really something to see. I mean, it's unbelievable how much people give. I was just completely blown away to watch it. But on the other hand, you also get, I mean, there are destitute children who end up at monasteries too. So it's almost like you get the very rich, you get the rich and the poor. So actually, sort of monastery, I mean, children seem to be coming from all sorts, actually, to be honest. Yeah, we are interested in what is the prestige associated with having a monk, and we can't answer that question yet. But it's so widespread that I'm wondering whether it mightn't be as great as you would think, because it is quite a widespread practice. Or it was. I mean, it may, I think this is, I should probably talk in the past tense, to be honest.
Thank you. Which sons are more likely to become a monk? First, second?
It is, again, I haven't shown you the data, but it is more likely to be lower down the birth order, yeah.
All right. Another is a kind of long question. When you're doing studies in China, how do you control for changes to family structures and historical disruptions to the monastic life? For example, cultural evolution, but also ongoing political regulations. Do you have to control for this by studying, say, Tibetan diaspora in India? And also to expand on the scope of this question, how do you account for the influence of secular authorities in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so, I mean, obviously the history's been enormous. I mean, the sort of boring answer is obviously you need to control for the cohort. So there's different things going on. So, for example, during the Cultural Revolution, most of these institutions could not exist, actually. But during the 80s, they were rebuilt and re-established and carried on again. There is a fertility has gone down. So, I mean, most people may have heard of the one-child policy. That was an urban thing. But most rural areas, including this one, the ones where we're working, have a 3-child policy. So that's obviously going to change. And that's been going for several decades now. And it's just been these, well, actually it's not yet been relaxed, but it, you know, these policies may be soon relaxed. I'm not sure, but, and then, yeah, actually, I mean, it may, you know, I think in a way we're trying to understand a historical practice, because I don't, you know, I think the things are going to change a lot in the future. And therefore, but I mean, interesting thing about demographic data is you're kind of more interested in what the grandparents are doing, because you can only really assess like costs and benefits in terms of what is that, you know, these long-term outcomes. So even though this is like a cross-sectional study, it's you know, the interesting thing about humans is they can tell you about their past, you know. So you can talk to these old guys and get really quite a lot of information. And yeah, I mean, I would imagine the costs and benefits are, you know, they're just changing dramatically now. But you know, as in Europe now, and you know, there were times when the monasteries were very powerful, and then politically they were just, you know, not, or even didn't exist. So you know, obviously history is going to make, I mean, everything in behavioral ecology is like context specific to the costs and benefits of what's going on at the time. But I think it's not just so, you know, no one's trying to claim anything universal. We're just trying to ask the question, can something so apparently costly as giving up your own children, which is almost unimaginable to those of us in a post-demographic transition, small child society, small number of children society, think of it as horrendous. You know, how could that be such a widespread feature of so many religions in the past, including this one? And so, but yes, costs and benefits and politics and everything, like with everything, it's always going to change those costs and benefits and you know, change the way it's going to be.
Thanks. Now there's a couple of questions on your inclusive fitness argument. One is probably more like a comment. This results look
I get Alberto on the chat. I'm sure he can.
These results look extremely similar to the argument about the emergence of homosexuality through increased inclusive fitness, non-reproducive sibling as a helper.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think you know, the costs and benefits probably wouldn't be necessarily exactly the same, and we don't know, you know, the mechanisms, but there are a number of questions that on the face of it look like evolutionary puzzles, and then when you look at them, even just going, I mean, these models are not, you know, they're based on Hamilton's rule, but bringing in local competition. And so, you know, yes, indeed, we have discussed a sort of general version of this could explain quite a number of things. And I mean, the nice thing about applying it in this case is that with demographic data, you can actually attempt to estimate some of these parameters. But yes, indeed. No, I think there are similarities there.
All right.
Alberto's listening, so I think he can probably answer it better in the chat.
There is another question on inclusive fitness. Isn't the time frame way too short for inclusive fitness to explain the phenomenon of celibate monks?
No. So I mean, behavioral ecologists are always looking at, I mean, that's the, you know, just going back to Tinbergen or whatever, I mean, you can measure costs and benefits in an instant, in a way, you know, going back to Tinbergen, throwing eggshells out of nests and saying, hey, look, those nests get predated, those nests don't, you know, it's like a one-day experiment, and you find a fitness cost because these chicks get eaten and these chicks don't get eaten. So, you know, behavioral ecology doesn't, I mean, we're a long-lived species, so yeah, it's interesting to have grandparental data so that we know that a cost incurred by children might not be a cost incurred by siblings or incurred by grandchildren, if you see what I mean, depending on the currency that we use. But so we can look at the inclusive fitness costs. Oh, I see but I guess what you're saying is that couldn't be how it evolved. Well, yeah, no, that's the boring answer. Yeah, I guess what you probably mean is, yeah, we're not saying we're not saying you're genetically programmed to be a monk. So it is a cultural trait. So then we get into all this thorny stuff about, can you use Hamilton's rule or something similar to look at whether a cultural trait will spread? and I guess I'm very bad at looking at mechanisms because I'm a behavioural ecologist. I'm sort of interested in the idea that I think if something has a huge fitness cost, we would be resistant to doing it. Whereas if it doesn't have a huge fitness cost, we would not be resistant to doing it. And we might even think it's a good idea. Or if it has a fitness benefit, then we might even think it's a good idea. And the actual mechanisms for that are, yeah, pretty complicated. That's all what all you cultural evolution guys are doing. But, you know, there's an aspect of cultural evolution that I think works pretty well with these simple models, because it, you know, maybe it is just a kind of thing that, like, you know, parents are living in expectations that about 1 child in 7 might go to the monastery, or with a chance of 1 in 7, they might send their kid away. And we're looking at whether that is likely to increase or decrease and how that's going to affect your fitness. So, yeah, I haven't answered it very well. Alberto probably answered it better because he's talked about, you know, different kinds of cultural selection, if you like, some which are very similar to your biological fitness and some which aren't. So yeah, no, I don't think anyone's arguing that this is a genetic trait, but there might be, yeah, I'm gonna, you know, leave the phenotypic gambit here. Because the actual biological mechanisms of cultural transmission are really complicated. I know some of you guys have written about it. But I'm quite happy with taking that simple, at least starting position, that things are less of a puzzle if they're actually improving your fitness rather than harming your fitness, which we thought this trait might be, but maybe it's not, I guess is the conclusion. So we're not saying, just like, I don't know, stuff I've done on the evolution of matrilineal or whatever, we're not saying these are genetic traits. They are cultural traits, but somehow they're passed on more, I think, if they improve your fitness.
There is a question about your phylogenetic approach. Actually, quick question on its applicability. Phylogenetic approach doesn't work if the system is not neutral, or if there is cultural migration, or as in the history of Gansu and neighboring Mongolia, there was a massive invasion by the Yuan Empire about 900 years ago.
Okay, so this particular phylogeny is not, I mean, unusually for me, because I normally use languages as a sort of proxy. This is the phylogeny of Islamic sects and schools. So this is a phylogeny of beliefs which might go extinct. Okay, so I guess if someone, you know, if there's some sort of change in, I mean, if new people come in, that's sort of not in the tree, if you see what I mean, because it's a phylogeny of beliefs. It's not a phylogeny of genes or of individuals. Is that the example that was being given? And similarly, if people just change their religion, so maybe some, well, lots of Buddhist groups became Muslims. I don't know how common it was the other way, but if it does, then that's an extinction event in this, because it's the extinction of beliefs. It's not the extinction of, you know, people necessarily. Of course it could be, but it's a tree of beliefs. So yes, you have to believe that model. We didn't look at anything after, we looked at survival after 1900, but in the 20th century you get a lot more kind of globalization and internet and all this. So we weren't looking at modern beliefs. We kind of put a cutoff because we still felt that this kind of rather simple model probably worked better when there was less connection around the world through media and all this kind of thing. So it is a historical analysis, and it might not work if you try to do it now. So it's always a model. I mean, you just need to have a model. You know, we're abstracting reality. We're simplifying it. Why are we simplifying it? You know, social anthropologists and historical colleagues will just say, you can't simplify it. It's not that simple. And, you know, they're right if you're interested in the absolute truth. But if you want to test co-evolutionary models, just like with any other model, you need to simplify it. And that simplification might be a step too far, in which case chuck it all in the bin. But or you think that it's a simplification that is actually, you know, a pretty good model of what's going on, and therefore it can help us look and answer a particular question. In this case, are these beliefs co-evolving? And you know, so and people have asked that question ever since we've been making cultural phylogeny. Some people say, oh, it doesn't work, or I know the case where here and here where it didn't work because that happened and this happened and that's it. And then we're not denying those things. It's just a question of you know, the word model is exactly that. It's not, you know, an exact rerunning of history exactly as it happens. It's a simplification of history to try and bring some understanding. And, you know, social anthropologists don't believe those simplifications bring understanding, whereas on the whole, biological anthropologists believe that they do. And that's one of the reasons we end up arguing sometimes.
Okay. Yeah. We have several panelists here, and I see that Andy is raising his hand. Andy, please unmute yourself if you. Yeah, unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, Ruth. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah. Really interesting stuff in the talk. It was just, you were talking about those cultural phylogenies, and I had a kind of more general question, which I think might be different from what you've just tried to answer. There's kind of famous diagram image of two trees. I forget who did it. It was someone like Kroeber or something. And one's an ever-branching tree, which is meant to represent the way biological evolution works. But the other tree, which was drawn to show how cultural evolution works, has a lot of the branches crossing each other, and when they cross each other, sometimes they merge. You know, they blend. The idea of, you know, cultural blending. And I was wondering, you know, are there some domains of behavior or, you know, beliefs, whatever, that do actually tend to map to an ever-branching tree culturally, and others where, you know, you do get more blending? I mean, I don't know if that's something you look at, or whether you're, as it were, you know, using the phylogenies as a tool. So you put everything into that phylogeny, and, you know, then you run with that. I don't know if that's if I'm being coherent in asking the question. And
no, I mean, it's like, it's a bit similar to the other question, but it is, I mean, so normal, I mean, the phylogeny that I have normally used to ask questions about cultural evolution have been language trees.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're not perfect models of cultural evolution, but they're not bad. And to be honest, languages don't blend that much. I'm not saying they never do, but unlike genes, which blend a lot, you know, if you migrate into a new population, you tend to learn the language that everyone around you is speaking, even though you're bringing genes in from somewhere else. Your language, and probably a lot of your culture, tends to be what your peers are doing, just by the very nature of culture and language. And therefore, I think it's, I mean, making a gene tree within humans is a mess often, whereas a language tree is often pretty tree-like. So I really like language trees, and I don't advise normally making phylogenies out of anything other than languages. If you're looking at within human, I mean, that's a bit dramatic, because I know lots of people have tried to use material culture and lots of other things, but I think it's really dangerous for the reasons that you say, because we don't really know that the tree-like model is very good. But then I'm saying, you know, then I'm breaking my own rule, because here's a phylogeny of religious beliefs and sects. But I just think in this particular example, the tree-like model is not bad, because there's all these documented fissions. You know, you have a religious group and then they have a religious disagreement, which is often about, it might be about a particular belief, but it's very often about who's going to lead the group. Like, are you going with that leader, or are you going with the other leader? And that there might be slightly different beliefs, and then the two groups end up fissioning and becoming different sects, so in different schools. So I just think in this case, it's not a bad model. And I think in the case of language, I think it's a pretty good way of getting a tree-like history when we're looking at human variation. Obviously, when you're looking at something in biology, people look at species, and people are aware that there is some gene transfer between species. There's probably not very much. And obviously there might be more in terms of cultural traits, but I do think languages are more tree-like than genes, put it that way. And therefore,
if we could just quickly come back on that, I know people like Jamie Tirani, for example, looking at the cultural evolution of Iranian rugs, trying to distinguish, how much blending there was and how much branching there was. And I think it was kind of a bit 50-50 maybe. And I wonder if that might be generally true for, art and material. Whereas, as you say, for other domains like language, maybe religion, I don't know. It's more ever branching. I mean, it's interesting to know.
I think Iranian rugs are probably not very frequency dependent. That's the problem. They might even be reverse frequency dependent in that, if you come up with a new idea, that's quite cool, whereas with language, if you're speaking a hybrid language or an unknown language, that's costly. You've got to, it doesn't matter even if your mother or father can't speak the language, you as a second generation will speak it perfectly if you were born there, because you have to. That's how you survive. And therefore, that's why I think there is this kind of groupiness about it. Kinship systems might be like that. Religions might be like that. You just have to believe what everyone else believes, because otherwise you're going to get into all sorts of trouble, and I'm not sure that material culture is like that. I think it is a bit tree-like, because obviously archaeologists have been using it forever to say, okay, we think these are the Beaker people because they have, certain material culture, but so I'm not saying it has no tree signal, but I would expect it to have less. And I would expect, there are statistics where you can try and measure as you say, the strength of that signal, and then decide whether it's a useful model or not. And it might not be a useful model, but I think you also have to distinguish between the tree and the trait that you're looking at. So you might have built your tree out of language, say. So I think in this, so for example, in this case, you could build your tree out of language, and then one group might adopt a cultural trait de novo or from another place, and then that would be a change in a cultural trait on the branch of your tree. It's not saying these traits never change. It's saying they are changing, and we're trying to measure their rate of change along the branches of the tree in both directions in those models I was using. And so in this particular case, there was quite strong phylogenetic signal in apocalyptic beliefs. So that was something that if something is evolving so fast, then the tree model falls apart. But apocalyptic beliefs were stable enough that there was quite a strong sort of tree-like signal in that particular trait. And also a bit in warfare, but that was less phylogenetic, to be honest. But the beliefs actually showed quite strong signal, as does kinship systems show quite strong phylogenetic signal. It's not they never change, it's just that, what your nearest phylogenetic neighbors are doing does have plenty of predictive value as to about what you're doing. And but it won't be true. It won't be true of everything,
Okay, thanks. Luke, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Ruth. Thanks for a wonderful talk. A couple questions. One might be quick. So you showed with the really nice sister-in-law analysis that the increase in the monk's brother's fitness, right, is not just that he has a second wife. It increases the fitness. It increased the fitness of the brother's wife, right?
Yes.
So do you have any ideas about what the mechanism is? Could be something, do they give does the monk collect the donations and then he makes another pot for his brother? And he gives that to his brother or something like that?
Well, I think that's unlikely to be the case. I think it's more that you know, family resources are just, you know, concentrated in the brothers rather than, so the monk is stepping out of the reproductive game. So he doesn't need a house. He doesn't need any yaks. So all the things that, so, you know, the other brothers are benefiting. I mean, again, we're going to try and look at that. We don't even really know yet, but I suspect that that might be a big part of it. That might not be enough. I mean, there might be also, you know, I mean, having generated these institutions, they are quite powerful. So I guess it's not impossible that the institution is also taking more than it, more than people want to give. But also there might be just political benefits or something like that, you know, in that these are powerful institutions who might make decisions about disputes, or they might be able to lend you money if you need money, or, you know, they even provide, you know, well, they provide religious services, they provide some sort of medical information sometimes. I mean, you know, there may be, or they may just be powerful and therefore help your family in other ways. So there might be like hidden benefits that are political in some way, that just by being associated with the church, you're somehow, or the monastery or the temple or whatever it is, you are, you know, gaining some kind of hidden benefits over the long term that are a bit more hard to quantify. But yeah, prestige would be one of the ones we're going to try and measure, actually.
Okay, and then Sergey, you want me to ask my other question?
Yeah.
Okay, so my other question was, with the apocalyptic beliefs, with the revolutionary thing, it was like a binary variable, right? So I was thinking, like, you didn't have a scale of violence measure or anything, right?
No. So this was using, I mean, this particular model that we were using is designed for presence or absence of. So there are phylogenetic methods for looking at quantitatively varying traits, and the trouble with
that's not my question. I mean, it's very hard to get good quantitative numbers. It's my experience doing this with Anabaptists. It's very hard to get good numbers to say, well, you know, what was the per capita death rate in this Anabaptist group versus that Anabaptist group? I could just never find it. But so I was wondering, is the apocalyptic belief effect you have, is it partly because maybe groups are more likely to have apocalyptic beliefs if they're experiencing like a higher death rate, like they're experiencing a more intense level of violence trying to suppress the group. And then that's why they go extinct faster, is because of the violent suppression, like of the Cathars or whoever in European history. We know there are groups that were literally wiped out.
No, I think that is what's going on. I mean, that's sort of what the phylogenetic says. It says that living in a violent context is predisposing you to that belief, if our models are correct, more than the other way around. So, I mean, that's sort of what it was saying. So that is, I mean, the model's just looking at the directions of change, okay? And that's what it's saying. It's saying that the violence precedes the belief rather than the belief precedes the violence. So that, and the fact that you get wiped out might be because, you're living in violence because you're under threat, yes, and you're being attacked, and you're attacking others, and generally, or being attacked, or both, and therefore, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I do think that's how it's happening.
Thank you. Well, we have many more questions, but let me just read the last one. Is the similarity between studying for a PhD and entering a monastery only superficial?
Well, I mean, the only differences I would say is that we, the flippant answer is yes. I guess if I'm answering it semi-seriously, we think not many individuals would end up in the monastery if it wasn't for parental decision. So I think there's some parent-offspring conflict going on here. You know, so if you're making the choice for yourself, that it's something that not very many people do, but not very many people do PhDs. So there you are, probably very similar.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and thank you to everybody. And we hope to see you here next week when Patricia is there. Will be giving the last talk in this series.